Hey folks, this is Milan, the LSAT tutor. Thanks for checking out this video. All right, so today we'll be going over perspectives, what they are, why they're useful, why it's important to pay attention to points of view. Okay, so we'll start with our overview. We're going to be talking about what is a perspective, how do you identify it, and why is it important? And just to give you the short answer right away, essentially, perspectives are points of view that the author responds to, and they make it easier for you to grasp the structure of the argument. All right. And as usual, before we jump into it, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to check out my site for more videos, more articles, and blog posts, and over 20 hours of completely free LSAT prep videos. All right. So looking at the first thing, what is a perspective? How do we understand what a perspective is? Basically, when we speak of perspectives in the context of LSAT, we're not merely talking about a point of view. A perspective is a structural element of the argument that dictates what you need to be paying attention to. So, once again, remember, at its most basic level, an argument consists of a conclusion supported by premises. A conclusion is the claim the author wants you to accept, and premises, on the other hand, are the reasons that are given to persuade you that the conclusion is valid. So sometimes you may also encounter sub-conclusions, which are essentially intermediate conclusions that serve as both a premise and a conclusion with an argument. Think of them as links in a chain. They receive and then they go on to give support. Now, some arguments are straightforward, presented solely by the author without introducing any external point of view. So these arguments consist of premises leading to a conclusion without really any additional complexity. So, for example, if an author says that Michael Jordan won more NBA championships than LeBron James, and therefore Michael Jordan is the better basketball player, that argument doesn't include any external point of view. Focus here is just on the author's position, Jordan's better, and there's just the premise that you got more championships. So it's simpler to break down to to identify the structure. Premise leads to conclusion. Now things get a bit more complex when the author interacts with another point of view within the argument. So, for example, if in that argument that I gave, if the author starts by saying, "While many fans think that LeBron James is better than Jordan, Jordan won more championships and therefore Jordan's the better player," we now have an additional perspective, the initial statement that many fans think that LeBron James is better. And that additional perspective is what the author is responding to within their arguments. In this context, a perspective serves as a viewpoint that, generally speaking, opposes the main argument. And it's that viewpoint that is a frame of reference for the author to present their main point. Now, the author's response can vary. It could be direct criticism, it could be more subtle, it could just qualify. But the key thing is that it is a response. It's usually going to be a critical response that challenges that initial perspective or point of view. Now, understanding perspectives, it can actually be made a bit easier if you think of them or you liken them to everyday conversations or debates. So imagine a two-person dialogue where the first person presents an argument and the second person responds to it. In the arguments, in these arguments that I'm talking about, where you have perspective, the author plays both roles, introducing initially the external perspective and then responding to it with their own viewpoint. So you can think of this interaction between this perspective and the author's response as a sort of debate encapsulated within a single argument. In fact, if you just think actually in the argument section, the logical reasoning section, there's going to be questions that have two speakers. Structurally, this is the same thing, or not the same thing, but structurally, this is similar in that the author is not, it's not two speakers, but the author is introducing the main point that they're then responding to, not their main point, but a point that they're responding to. Okay, so that's what it's a good way to do it. That's how you want to understand perspectives. Now, how do we identify perspectives? What do we look for to spot perspectives? Well, essentially, you're looking for language that introduces an agent and their opinion, and in addition to that, language that introduces opposition or a response. So, when an external perspective is introduced in an argument, it's often done in a specific way. Authors commonly employ phrases that directly attribute the perspective to specific agents, such as arguments in an argument. I say environmentalists claim, or economists argue, or scientists think, or many fans believe, as in the argument I gave. And these phrases serve as your first clue to recognize an alternative viewpoint. It's introducing a point of view that belongs to a group or an individual. You want to keep in mind, though, that sometimes authors will also use more general agents or more general subjects like, people think, or even it is believed, or many argue to introduce perspectives. So you want to keep an eye on that. It's not always going to be specific individuals or groups. Likewise, once the perspective has been introduced, pay close attention to the author's response. So you want to look for opposition indicators, words like however, but, yet, contrary, nonetheless is an important one. If you find these words, these transitional words, or these opposition words or indicators, they signal that the author is about to respond to what came before them. Okay, so that's how you identify it. Now, why do we even bother with this? So what is the importance? Why is it important to recognize perspectives? Well, basically, recognizing this framework is actually very useful in the arguments and the reading comp sections because it clarifies what you're reading. It helps you identify the structure of what you're reading more easily, and it also helps a lot in specific question types as well, in particular. So, at its core, recognizing different perspectives in an argument amplifies your understanding of the structure of the argument and illuminates what the main point and the premises are. So if you can recognize that the author is introducing a reference point for their argument, it becomes a lot easier to break down their argument. So you can just much more easily identify the main point and the support for the main point. It's just a very useful guidepost for simplifying the complexity or the seeming complexity of arguments and giving you, giving you insight, letting you see what the structure is, what the conclusion, what the premises are of the argument. Likewise, being able to identify perspectives helps a lot with specific question types like method reasoning and main point. Like something like 80% of all the main point questions have this structure. When you can see this, it just makes it a lot easier to deal with that question. So these, like I said, these questions use the structure frequently. So, for example, if a question asks you to identify the conclusion or the main point, then you can recognize and introduce perspective, then that'll guide you and recognize the author's response and therefore the author's main point, which is the question is asking for. Likewise, they often serve, these perspectives are often, as I said, sort of structural pivot points in that you go from perspective to the author's response, and that gives you an idea of the logical flow of the argument. And this is just very useful in the method of reasoning questions. It allows you to see how the argument is structured, and it also helps identifying the author's response just makes it easier for you to identify what kind of response it is, and just what to look for in the answer choices. And I've been basically focusing on perspectives in individual arguments in the logical reasoning section, the argument section, where it kind of appears there, but they play a very similar role in the reading comprehension section, and you want to be on the lookout for them in the passages as well. Generally speaking, in the passages, you're going to have multiple perspectives just because it's a longer passage. And I'm actually going to have an upcoming article and video that talks about perspectives in the passages. Okay, so that's the importance of perspectives, how we find them and what they are. And so let's give a quick recap of where we're at, or what we went over, sorry. When we speak of perspectives in the context of the LSAT, we're not just talking about points of view. A perspective is a structural element of the argument that dictates what you need to be paying attention to. To identify perspectives, you want to look for language that introduces an agent and their opinion. And I should add to that language of opposition or transition. So words like however, yet, but, etc. And recognizing this framework is very useful for the arguments reading comp sections because it clarifies what you're reading and it helps with those specific question types. Okay, so thanks for checking out the video. And actually, I just want to mention that I actually go into this very topic in a lot of depth at the very beginning of my free LSAT prep videos in my free course on my site. So if you want a more detailed breakdown, feel free to check that out. And you'll see where I talk about it in the context of arguments and also in the context of the reading comprehension passages. Okay, so thanks for watching, and until next time.